I remember the sound before I remember the cold. My suitcase hit the porch so hard the wheels bounced skidding across the wooden boards until it wedged against the railing. At first, I just stood there at the bottom of the walkway, clutching a grocery bag with a carton of eggs and a loaf of bread, wondering why my own belongings were flying out of my house. Then Ethan stepped into the doorway, framed by the warm yellow light of the entryway that used to feel like home. His shoulders were squared, his expression carved out of stone, and in his hand was a crumpled lottery ticket that looked like it had been through a war. Snow spun between us in the Colorado wind as he lifted the ticket like a judge presenting evidence. "You're not needed anymore. I'm done carrying dead weight." The words did not hit all at once. They arrived in pieces, sharp fragments that tore through me one by one. I blinked hard, convinced I had misheard him. Ethan had always been short-tempered lately more than before, but this felt like something else, something colder and final. I took a step closer. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" My voice cracked, frost catching in my throat. He scoffed, shaking the ticket. $100 million, Nat. I finally got what I deserve. 100 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. I stared at the ticket confused because I didn't remember buying one. The wind bit at my face, but Ethan didn't flinch. He only reached for the door, fingers tightening around the edge as he looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger blocking their path. "I'm done pretending we're a team." The door slammed. The lock clicked. A tiny sound, but it shattered something enormous inside me. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the door as if it might open again, as if Ethan might laugh and tell me it was all a terrible joke. But the house stayed silent. The same house where we celebrated birthdays, cried through miscarriages, argued over bills, and promised each other better days. I climbed the steps, slowly slipping once on the ice. I knocked softly at first, then harder. No answer. I pressed my forehead against the door, breathing in the familiar scent of cedar from the wreath I had hung 2 weeks earlier, trying to ground myself in anything that felt real. "Ethan, please. Talk to me." Still nothing. My knees buckled and I sank onto the frozen porch snow soaking through my jeans. My hands trembled as I reached for the suitcase he had thrown out. The zipper was half open, clothes sticking out like wounds. I tried calling his name again, then whispering it as if a softer tone might unlock the door he had already chosen to shut. The wind howled in response, carrying away the last warmth of the home I once believed was ours. Eventually, I dragged myself back to the car. The heater sputtered, barely fighting off the cold. My breath fogged the windshield as I watched the porch light flicker, then go dark. I didn't know then that the worst part wasn't the cruelty or the abandonment. It was the lie under it all. The truth was sitting in his hand as he locked me out. The ticket he claimed as his victory was one I had bought. That night, while I shivered in my car, Ethan was already celebrating with his mistress, raising glasses of champagne, in a house I was no longer allowed to enter, completely unaware that the jackpot he boasted about was never his to claim. Before everything shattered, our life looked ordinary from the outside. The kind of modest, steady existence people in small-town Colorado often lead. We lived in a beige 2-bedroom rental with creaky floorboards and windows that whistled in the winter wind, but it was ours, or at least that was what I used to tell myself. I worked the late shift at a call center just off the highway, spending most evenings listening to strangers complain about shipments refunds and life in general. The pay was tight but predictable. Ethan drove for a regional delivery company, waking up before dawn, coming home tired, but usually still willing to sit with me and split a microwaved dinner while we watched reruns on the old television we bought from a yard sale. Back then, our problems felt small enough to fit inside the house. Overdue bills, a leaky sink, a heater that groaned all winter. We learned to laugh through them. Some nights when the snow piled high enough to cover the mailbox, we sat in the living room wrapped in one blanket, sipping the watery hot cocoa I insisted tasted better because I added cinnamon. Ethan would nudge me playfully, saying I was the only person he knew who could be sentimental about instant cocoa. On weekends, we tackled little projects together. Once we spent an entire Saturday in the garage trying to fix an old armchair we found on the curb. The chair was wobbly, the fabric outdated, and the wood chipped, but I loved it. Ethan humored me then. He held the flashlight while I restuffed the cushion and tightened screws, teasing me for being so determined to save furniture no one else wanted. I used to think those moments meant something, that they were proof of a partnership built on patience, compromise, and small hopes we whispered into the quiet of our rented home. But looking back, I see now that the cracks started much earlier than I wanted to admit. At first, Ethan's dissatisfaction slipped in quietly. He began complaining about his job, calling his coworkers idiots, and saying he was meant for bigger things. I chalked it up to stress. But then the changes deepened. He started buying expensive cologne and shirts that didn't match the paycheck he brought home. He brushed off my questions, saying he wanted to feel better about himself, but the tone of his voice made it clear I should not press further. He began staying out late, claiming extra shifts even though his pay never reflected overtime. When I asked why he was home at odd hours, he snapped, "You wouldn't understand." That sentence was the first real wound, small but sharp. I tried to reason with myself that marriage meant patience, understanding, and faith in the person you chose. That love required giving someone the benefit of the doubt, especially when they seemed lost. For a long time, I pushed aside the discomfort curling in my chest. I reminded myself of the hardships we had already survived together, the apartment we lost when Ethan was laid off years ago, the medical bills after my appendix surgery, the quiet grief of a miscarriage we never fully talked about. We carried those things together. Or at least I thought we had. But as the months passed, Ethan pulled further away. He began locking his phone, angling the screen away from me whenever he typed. He stepped outside to take calls, and when he came back in his face always held a different expression, one I could never decipher. He smelled like unfamiliar cologne more often. He spent more time in front of the mirror, adjusting his hair, smoothing his shirt, examining himself like he was preparing for a life I knew nothing about. One evening, I reached for his hand while we watched the news, and he flinched, pretending he needed to adjust the remote. It was subtle, but it carved something out of me. The warmth that once lived between us had thinned, replaced by a cold quiet that lingered even when we sat in the same room. I kept telling myself that marriages went through phases, that all couples had seasons where the connection dimmed. I clung to the belief that if I stayed steady, the storms inside him would eventually settle. What I did not know then was that the storm had already chosen its path, and it was carrying him away from us long before the night he threw me out. The signs began quietly, almost politely, as if trying not to disturb the illusion I was clinging to. At first, it was Ethan's impatience with everything around him. A misplaced mug, a bill, I forgot to mail, a routine delay at the call center that forced me to stay late. Things that once rolled off his shoulders suddenly set him off. He would sigh loudly, shake his head, and mutter, "You're holding me back." Gnat as if I were some invisible anchor dragging him away from a future only he could see. He started saying strange things, like he was meant for a bigger life, that some people are born to stay small, his eyes lingering on me in a way that made it clear which category he believed I belonged in. Then came the secrecy. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter or wedged between couch cushions, never left his pocket. He angled the screen away when notifications buzzed, and whenever I walked into a room unexpectedly, he locked it with the speed of someone trained in concealment. I tried to ask once, gently hoping for reassurance, but he rolled his eyes and said, "Don't be paranoid. Not everything is about you." His words stung more than I expected, landing somewhere deep and soft. The distance between us widened with each passing week, a gap that kept stretching until even our shared silence felt crowded with things unsaid. What unnerved me most was his sudden interest in appearances. Ethan had never cared much for clothes beyond comfort, but now he wore crisp shirts and polished boots without explanation. He started using an expensive-smelling cologne that clung to his skin long after he walked past me. When I asked where he got it, he shrugged, saying it was a gift from a friend, though he never mentioned which friend or why they were giving him cologne. His schedule became unpredictable. He'd leave the house early, but come home long after his shift should have ended. When I worried out loud, he dismissed me with a tight smile. "I'm working extra. Someone in this house has to think beyond bare survival." But the paycheck never reflected the hours he claimed to work. I noticed the discrepancy one afternoon while sorting the mail. I held the pay stub in my hand, staring at the numbers that made no sense, feeling a strange hollow sensation build in my chest. It was as if there were two versions of Ethan now, the one I lived with, quiet and distant, and the one living elsewhere in shadows I could not reach. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Ethan said he was driving to the gas station for snacks. He left at 7. By midnight, he still wasn't home. I called him, my stomach twisting with worry, but he didn't answer. I called again and again. Nothing. He finally walked through the door shortly after 1 in the morning, smelling of cologne I didn't recognize and wearing a shirt I had never seen before. He offered no explanation beyond I needed air. When I pushed, he snapped, "You suffocate everything. Isn't that enough of an answer?" The cruelty in his tone left me speechless. I retreated to the bedroom wondering how a man could reshape himself so drastically without warning. The next morning, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket from an upscale restaurant in downtown Denver, a place with white tablecloths and valet parking, a place neither of us could afford. The receipt showed dinner for two entrees, 2 desserts, a bottle of wine that cost more than our weekly groceries. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the ink with my thumb, trying to make sense of something my heart already knew. When I confronted him later, he shrugged, saying it was a work thing, nothing I needed to worry about. His eyes didn't match his voice. They were distant focused somewhere behind me, as if he were already imagining a different life he hadn't invited me into. I swallowed the ache, telling myself that love demanded trust, but a quieter truth whispered beneath it. Love cannot anchor someone already walking away. I went to bed that night with the unsettling feeling that something had slipped out of place in our lives. Something small but irreversible, like a hinge snapping off a door that still appeared to be closed. The night I bought the lottery ticket did not feel special in any way. It was one of those bitter Colorado evenings when the cold seeps through your coat no matter how tightly you wrap it and all you can think about is getting home and warming your hands over the heater vents. I had just finished a long shift at the call center, my ears buzzing from hours of listening to frustrated voices and scripted apologies. The wind cut across the parking lot as I walked to my car, carrying the kind of exhaustion that settles behind your eyes and makes everything feel a little heavier than it should. I decided to stop at a small convenience store a few blocks from home, mostly because I did not want to face Ethan's icy mood just yet. The store was nearly empty, lit by humming fluorescent lights that flickered in the corners. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and cinnamon air freshener. I went in for something simple soup maybe, or bread, anything that could pass for dinner without much effort. The owner, an older man with gentle eyes and a worn baseball cap, stood behind the counter flipping through a newspaper. When he looked up and saw me rubbing my hands together, he chuckled and said, "Cold night out there? You should buy a lottery ticket, honey. Maybe life owes you a little miracle." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "A miracle?" At this point, I'd settle for a day without snow. He smiled and slid a stack of tickets closer to me. "Can't hurt to try. $10 for a chance at something better." Something about the way he said it made me pause. Not because I believed in luck, I hadn't felt lucky in a long time, but because a part of me, a small, tired part, wanted to imagine a life where things weren't so tight, where Ethan didn't come home angry, where the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. So I pulled out a $10 bill, handed it to him, and picked one ticket at random. "Just for fun," I said, folding it into my coat pocket. He nodded. Sometimes the best things start as a joke. I left the store with a can of chicken soup, a loaf of bread, and a strange sense of something. Not hope, exactly. More like a brief flicker of possibility that warmed me for half a second before the wind snuffed it out. By the time I reached my car, the ticket had already slipped deeper into my coat pocket. I didn't think about it again. Driving home, I hummed along to a song on the radio, tapping the steering wheel in rhythm, trying to shake off the heaviness of the day. When I parked in front of the house, I grabbed the groceries and tossed my keys into the little compartment next to the steering wheel. The lottery ticket fell in with them landing unnoticed among Penn's receipts and spare change. I walked inside, smiled at Ethan out of habit, and listened to him complain about something I can't even remember now. The night slipped into routine, and the ticket remained forgotten in the car. Even when the news announced the winning numbers 2 days later, I didn't make the connection. Why would I? It was just a $10 whim, a tiny dream folded into my winter coat and buried under the reality of a life unraveling in slow, quiet ways. I had no idea then that the small, insignificant choice I made in that flickering convenience store would later become the fault line that split my world open. The shift in Ethan was not sudden, but once it began, it spread through our lives like a slow, creeping frost coating everything familiar until I could no longer recognize the man I had married. It started with small things, little bursts of unusual cheerfulness that felt out of place beside the growing distance between us. One morning, he woke up humming loudly in the bathroom, water splashing as he shaved with a level of enthusiasm I had not seen in years. I stood in the doorway, watching him trying to understand why a man who had spent months complaining about his job and his life was suddenly smiling at his own reflection like he had discovered a secret. When I asked if something good had happened, he simply said, "Some of us are meant for more than this," Nat before brushing past me to get dressed. Over the next few days, the strangeness multiplied. Ethan came home with an expensive leather jacket he insisted he bought on clearance, but the price tag sticking out of the pocket told a different story. He started carrying wads of cash even though his paycheck hadn't changed. He claimed he had won a small poker game with coworkers, but Ethan barely knew how to play cards. His behavior unnerved me, but I forced myself to believe his explanations because the alternative felt too frightening to consider. The distance between us thickened. He stopped eating dinner with me, saying he already grabbed something on the way home. He spent long stretches in the bedroom with the door locked, talking in a low voice that died the moment he heard my footsteps. One evening, when he stepped outside to take a call, I heard him laugh, a soft, intimate laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months. My stomach twisted. I wanted to ask questions, but every time I opened my mouth, doubt and fear tangled together, silencing me. I told myself marriage required trust, even when trust began to feel like a blindfold. The first real fracture came the night I realized Ethan was hiding something in his truck. He never let me drive it anymore, even though we used to share both vehicles without a second thought. He carried the keys everywhere he went, slipping them into his pocket, even when he was just stepping into the shower. One evening, while he was taking out the trash, he left the truck unlocked. It was the first time in weeks I had seen the door unguarded. I walked toward it slowly, feeling a strange mix of guilt and dread. When I opened the passenger door, the cold air rushed out as if guarding whatever secret was tucked inside. My eyes drifted to the glove compartment. I hesitated, then pulled it open. Inside, buried under old registration papers and scattered receipts, was a folded piece of paper with creases worn deep into it. I pulled it out with trembling fingers and unfolded it. A lottery ticket. My breath caught. The numbers were circled. I didn't know what they meant in that moment, but I knew the look of a ticket that had been handled too many times, held too tightly. Before I could think or move or breathe, Ethan's voice came from behind me. "What are you doing?" His tone was sharp, cutting through the air like ice. I turned quickly, startled, the ticket still in my hand. I saw the door open. I was just snooping," he snapped, stepping closer. His face was red, his jaw clenched. "Give me that." He snatched the ticket away before I could respond and stuffed it into his back pocket. "It's nothing. Just trash. You wouldn't understand." Something inside me cracked, not because I believed him, but because I knew he was lying. And worse, he didn't care that I knew. From that moment on, the house felt smaller. The walls carried an electric tension humming with secrets he kept tucked into pockets and locked drawers. He walked with a swagger he had never earned, and the air around him carried a manic edge, as if he were constantly bracing for a life he hadn't yet told me he planned to live. The man who once repaired furniture with me, who laughed at my burnt pancakes and kissed my forehead on tired mornings, was disappearing. In his place grew someone I didn't know, someone hungry, reckless, and untethered. And though I couldn't name it yet, I sensed that whatever he was hiding was powerful enough to destroy everything we had left. The night he finally broke, whatever was left between us began like any other tense evening. But there was something in the air, a sharpness, a heaviness, as if the house itself sensed what was coming. Ethan walked in later than usual, smelling of cologne I had never owned, and carrying a confidence so inflated it barely fit through the doorway. He tossed his keys onto the counter, ignoring the dinner I had kept warm for hours, and stood in the middle of the kitchen with his arms crossed, watching me with an expression I could not read. It wasn't anger exactly. It was worse. It was indifference. "We need to talk," he said. Finally, his tone clipped. I set down the dish towel, trying to steady my breath. About what? He exhaled loudly, as if the conversation itself inconvenienced him. About us. About this life. I can't keep doing this, Nat. I can't keep pretending this. He gestured broadly at the kitchen, the house, maybe even at me is enough. A cold wave washed over me. Ethan, what do you mean? We've been struggling, but we can. He cut me off. That's the problem. You're content with struggling. You're content with small. I'm not. I want more. I deserve more. I stared at him, stunned. More what? More money. More excitement. Or more someone else? The flicker in his eyes answered the question before he opened his mouth. Brooke understands me, he said almost proudly. The name hit me like a slap. I had never met her, but I had seen her name once lighting up his phone before he locked the screen too quickly. So that's it, I whispered. You're leaving because of her. I'm leaving because I'm done living like this, he snapped. She sees who I can be. She believes in my potential. Potential. The word sounded hollow coming from a man who had spent years blaming the world for his misfortunes. I took a shaky breath. Ethan, you're making a mistake. We can fix this. We can talk. Please, just... No, he said suddenly violently. I'm done. I'm not dragging you into the life I'm about to have. His voice rose with each syllable until it echoed off the kitchen tiles. Then he walked past me, yanked open the hall closet, and pulled out my suitcase. I froze. What are you doing? Ending this, he said. He walked into the bedroom, flung open drawers, and began stuffing clothes inside without care. Some garments were crumpled, others were thrown so hard they landed on the floor. I followed him, shaking, begging him to stop, but he didn't even look at me. When the suitcase was full, he zipped it with a finality that made my heart plummet. Then he grabbed it by the handle, marched to the front door, and hurled it onto the porch. The sound echoed just like the moment in my nightmares. I stood there trembling as snow drifted into the doorway, chilling the warmth behind me. Get out, he said. Ethan, please, get out. His voice dropped low and venomous. And don't come back. I'm done carrying you. He slammed the door so hard the frame rattled, and before I could reach the handle, I heard the lock turn. One sharp click. A sound that ended a marriage. I stood frozen on the porch, hugging myself against the brutal Colorado wind, tears blurring the glow of the porch light. My suitcase lay half buried in snow clothes, peeking through the zipper like wounds. I tried calling his name, but my voice cracked into the night, swallowed by cold and silence. Eventually, I stumbled to my car, shivering so violently I could barely turn the key. As the weak heater sputtered to life, I realized something devastating. I cried, not because he left, not because the house behind me had become a stranger, but because I no longer knew who I had been loving all these years. The days that followed felt like wading through ice water, every breath tight and painful, every movement heavy with disbelief. I checked into a cheap roadside motel with flickering lights and carpets that smelled faintly of cigarettes, the kind of place travelers only stayed in out of desperation. I paid for one night, telling myself I would figure things out in the morning. One night turned into 3. I lived off instant noodles and vending machine snacks huddled under thin motel blankets that offered little warmth against the winter cold. I kept scrolling through my phone, staring at photos from a life that suddenly felt foreign. Smiling pictures of Ethan and me at picnics, birthday cakes with crooked candles, blurry selfies taken on road trips where everything seemed possible. I tried to reconcile the man in those photos with the man who threw me out like trash, but my mind refused to bridge the gap. My heart ached with a hollowness I had never known. On the 4th day, after avoiding social media entirely, I made the mistake of checking it. The first thing I saw was Ethan's face. He stood in front of a mansion with tall glass windows and a fountain in the yard, his arm draped around a woman I recognized instantly from glimpses on his phone. Brooke. They were holding champagne flutes, smiling like royalty. The caption read, "New beginnings with the person who believes in me." Luck finally chose someone who deserved it. My stomach twisted violently. I felt my pulse in my throat hot and sharp, as if every cell in my body recoiled at once. Luck finally chose someone who deserved it. Someone who deserved it. I locked my phone and curled into myself, clutching the motel pillow as tears soaked into the fabric. I didn't cry softly. I broke. The kind of sobbing that racks your entire body, that steals your breath and leaves you shaking long after the sound fades. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, for the future I believed we were building, for the version of me who spent years holding us together while he pulled away thread by thread. But most of all, I cried because I felt forgotten, erased, replaced in the most public, humiliating way possible. When the tears finally subsided, leaving me drained and trembling, I opened my phone again, this time with a numbness that steadied my hands. I scrolled through Ethan's photos, each one more painful than the last trips to expensive restaurants. New watches, a luxury car gleaming under dealership lights. And then I saw it. In one photo, Ethan was laughing as he held up a lottery ticket, the edges creased, just like the one I had glimpsed in his truck. My heart stuttered. I zoomed in. The numbers, though blurry, looked familiar. A strange sensation rippled through me, part fear, part recognition. That ticket, that day, the convenience store, the man behind the counter, the $10 bill. I swallowed hard, my breath catching as something inside me began to shift, slow but certain. Until that moment, I had believed Ethan left me because he stopped loving me. But now, staring at the ticket in his hand, a dawning realization crept through the cracks of my grief. He hadn't just abandoned me. He had taken something that wasn't his, something that might have been mine. That small, flickering doubt sparked the first ember of strength I had felt since the night he threw me out, glowing faintly beneath the ruins of everything I thought I knew. The image of Ethan holding that lottery ticket burned into my mind long after the motel room had gone quiet. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the night I bought that ticket, how casually I tucked it into the pocket of my coat, how little it meant to me at the time. I remembered setting my keys in the soup on the passenger seat, remembered the rustle of the paper ticket slipping into the compartment by the steering wheel, a place Ethan had full access to, a place he could reach without my noticing. By dawn, a cold clarity settled over me. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and for the first time since he threw me out, my grief began to harden into something sharper, steadier. I left the motel wrapped in my winter coat, my breath fogging the air as I slid behind the wheel of my car. My hands shook as I searched every compartment, lifting papers, digging under seats, checking crevices where things occasionally fell and disappeared. Nothing. The ticket was gone. The realization hit like a blow. Ethan had taken it. He knew where I kept my things, knew I rarely locked my car. I sat there frozen, gripping the steering wheel as the truth crept over me inch by inch. He didn't just leave me, he robbed me. For a moment, I felt sick, physically sick, like the world had tilted off its axis. Then a fierce determination rose from somewhere deep inside, a place grief couldn't touch. I drove to the convenience store where I'd bought the ticket, my heart pounding with every mile. The parking lot was empty except for a delivery truck idling near the back. I stepped inside, and the warmth of the store hit my face. The owner looked up, recognition flickering in his tired eyes. "You're back," he said with a gentle smile. "Cold out today." I swallowed hard. "I need to ask you something. Do you have cameras here?" His eyebrows lifted. "Cameras?" "Yes. Been running them for years." My pulse quickened. "Do they keep recordings from last week?" He blinked, studying me more carefully. "We keep a few weeks' worth." "Why?" My voice trembled. "I bought a lottery ticket here. The winning one. I think someone stole it." For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he nodded slowly and motioned for me to follow him past the counter into a small office cluttered with papers and mismatched furniture. He pulled up the footage, clicking through dates until the timestamp matched the night I remembered. "Here," he said, pointing to the grainy screen. The video flickered, showing me pushing open the store door, shaking snow from my coat, picking up a can of soup. Then it showed me approaching the counter, handing him a $10 bill. He handed me a ticket. I slipped it into my coat pocket. It was unmistakable. My breath hitched. "That's me," I whispered. I bought it. The owner nodded. I remember. You looked exhausted that night. Barely said a word. A sting tightened behind my eyes, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was vindication. He printed a statement confirming the purchase and offered to burn the footage to a USB drive for me. I accepted with numb hands, thanking him more times than necessary before stepping back into the cold air. In my car, I stared at the USB drive resting in my palm. Proof, my proof. But I needed more. With trembling fingers, I called the state lottery office. A woman with a cheerful voice answered her tone, a warm contrast to the ice in my veins. Hi. I began, my voice wavering. I believe there's been a mistake. I purchased a ticket at a convenience store on Willow Creek Road, the day the winning numbers were drawn. Do you have the ticket with you? She asked. No, I whispered. I think someone took it. There was a pause, then a shift in her voice, more serious now. Can you give me the time and location of purchase? I recited every detail. I remembered the date, the approximate time, the store name. She typed quickly, keys clicking softly through the phone. Please hold, she said. The line went silent except for faint office noises in the background. It felt like hours, though the screen said it had been 49 seconds. When she returned, her voice held a weight that made my heart race. Ma'am, the timestamp you gave matches the purchase time of the winning ticket. My breath caught. You mean it was mine? Based on our records, she said yes. The ticket was purchased by a woman matching your description. The car seemed to tilt the world, narrowing around me until all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. I pressed a hand to my forehead, tears blurring the windshield. He stole it, I whispered. He stole everything. The woman's tone softened. Would you like to begin a formal claim? We'll need evidence statements and any supporting documents. Yes, I said, steadying my voice. Yes, I would. When the call ended, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, feeling the weight of the truth settle like a stone in my chest. Ethan hadn't abandoned me because he outgrew our life. He hadn't chosen Brooke because she inspired him. He had won the jackpot with a ticket I bought, and instead of telling me, instead of sharing hope or joy or even a conversation, he threw me out like debris, cluttering the path to his new fantasy. The betrayal, now sharp and undeniable, burned away the last of my grief. What rose in its place was something clearer, colder, and stronger than anything I had ever felt. He took my future. I was going to take it back. Driving away from the convenience store with the USB drive resting in my coat pocket felt like carrying a pulse of electricity against my skin, a spark of truth I had been stumbling toward without knowing it. For days, I had dragged myself through grief like a half-broken thing, but now something inside me straightened, sharpened. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, a resolve that settled deep into my bones. I didn't go back to the motel. Instead, I parked outside the small public library where I used to spend quiet evenings before my life unraveled. The building looked the same as always, warm lights glowing behind frosted windows, the hum of a heater vibrating faintly through the air. Inside, I sat at a wooden table near the back, watching people come and go, each wrapped up in their own lives, unaware that mine was burning and rebuilding at the same time. I opened my laptop and searched for attorneys specializing in fraud, theft, and lottery disputes. Most firms looked intimidating, full of glossy portraits of lawyers who probably charged more for an hour than I earned in a week. But one name kept appearing in reviews: Alicia Ford. Sharp, unshakable, a strategist. People said she was the kind of lawyer who didn't raise her voice because she never needed to. Her results spoke loudly enough. I dialed her number before I could overthink it. A calm receptionist answered, and within minutes, I was scheduled for a consultation the next morning. When I walked into Alicia's office, it felt less like stepping into a law firm and more like entering a fortress. Everything was organized with precision, from the framed degrees on the wall to the neatly stacked files on her desk. She stood to greet me, extending a steady hand. Natalie, I'm Alicia. Please sit. Her voice carried the kind of confidence that made you breathe easier. I told her everything. Not just the facts, the store, the footage, the missing ticket, the news headlines, but the pieces of emotional wreckage, too. The night Ethan threw me out, the betrayal, the humiliation of seeing him flaunt a life built on something I purchased with a weary $10 bill and a moment of foolish hope. Alicia listened without interrupting, her pen gliding across the page, but her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, my throat tight and raw, she leaned back and exhaled. "You have a stronger case than you realize," she said. "The CCTV footage alone is powerful. Add the owner's statement, the timestamp verification, and the sudden lifestyle change of your husband. It's an airtight narrative of theft." "But he filed the claim," I whispered. "He has all the money." Alicia's eyes sharpened. "For now. But possession isn't proof. You are the purchaser. You are the rightful owner. And if he knowingly claimed a ticket that wasn't his, that's fraud. Potentially criminal fraud." She folded her hands. "If we do this, you must stay silent. Do not confront him. Do not warn him. Let him keep talking to the media, posting online, bragging. Every word he says while believing he's untouchable will help us." A strange, unexpected calm washed over me. "I can stay silent," I said. "I've already learned how." Over the next several weeks, my life settled into a pattern so quiet it seemed almost meditative. While Ethan flaunted his wealth, taking Brooke on ski trips and posing with luxury cars, I worked with Alicia, gathering every piece of evidence we needed. I returned to the convenience store twice to finalize paperwork. I retrieved bank statements showing the purchase timestamp. I took photos of the small glove compartment in my car where I had tossed the ticket. I wrote a detailed account of that night, every detail from the smell of cinnamon air freshener in the store to the exact moment the $10 bill left my fingertips. Alicia built the case piece by piece, shaping it into a fortress of facts Ethan could not scale. Meanwhile, I slipped back into a quieter version of my life. I rented a small studio apartment with thin walls and creaky floors, worked extra shifts to stay afloat, and avoided social media, except when Alicia advised me to monitor Ethan's posts. Each time I saw him in another interview flashing that smug smile while crediting his success to destiny, the quiet inside me deepened. Not bitterness, not rage, something colder, more focused, a stillness before the storm. One evening, Alicia called just as I finished eating a microwaved dinner. "Everything is ready," she said. "The evidence is strong. We file the lawsuit tomorrow." I held the phone to my ear, staring at the blank wall of my apartment. "Do you think he knows?" Alicia laughed softly. "Men like your husband only look forward, never sideways. He's too busy enjoying the fantasy he built on your back. He won't see you coming." I closed my eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the faintest rise of something warm in my chest. Not hope, not yet, but anticipation. Ethan had taken everything from me in the dark. Now, quietly, methodically, I was preparing to take it back in the light. The day of the hearing arrived with a cold, biting wind sweeping across Denver, the kind that numbs your fingers even through gloves and seems to whisper warnings you try not to hear. I woke before dawn, sitting at the edge of the bed in my tiny studio, staring at the wall as if it might offer reassurance. It didn't. What steadied me was the simple, undeniable truth that today was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, not just the money, but my voice, my dignity, my place in a story Ethan never expected me to fight for. I dressed in a navy suit. Alicia helped me choose the fabric, plain but sharp, something that made me feel anchored. When I met her outside the courthouse, she gave me a nod of approval. "Ready?" she asked. "More than I thought I'd ever be," I said. The courthouse steps buzzed with reporters, microphones, flashing cameras, swiveling toward anyone who looked remotely connected to the case. Ethan thrived in this chaos. I saw him before he saw me, standing near a black luxury SUV wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his hair slicked back with the kind of precision money buys, but character never sustains. Brooke was draped on his arm in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than a year of my old rent. She whispered something into his ear and laughed, tossing her hair as cameras snapped their photos. When Ethan finally spotted me walking toward the entrance, a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not guilt, not exactly fear, but a brief uneasy recognition of a reality he had not prepared for. He masked it quickly with a smirk. "Nat," he said as I passed him, "you really should stop embarrassing yourself." Alicia placed a firm hand on my back, guiding me forward before I answered. Let him talk, she murmured. Every word he says helps us. Inside the courtroom was packed journalists, spectators, strangers who had followed the story online. The air felt charged as if the room itself anticipated an earthquake. When we took our seats at the plaintiff's table, I could feel hundreds of eyes pressing against my skin. But when I looked up at the judge, a woman in her early 60s with a stern, no-nonsense composure, the tension inside me settled. Judge Marlene Shaw was known for her intolerance of theatrics and her commitment to evidence. She would not be swayed by charm or deception. Ethan strutted in moments later with his attorney, a man who looked like he practiced smiling in mirrors. They exchanged confident whispers, and Ethan kept glancing at me with a smug tilt of his chin. The session began with formalities' legal jargon echoing through the room like distant thunder. Then, Ethan's attorney launched into his opening argument, speaking with exaggerated sincerity. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is a tragic misunderstanding. Mrs. Hayes is clearly experiencing emotional distress from the end of her marriage and is attempting to conflate personal grievances with legal ones. Mr. Hayes purchased the winning ticket. He filed the claim. He has maintained this consistently. This lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to tarnish his reputation and access funds he rightfully won." A few people in the audience nodded, swayed by confidence rather than truth. I felt my pulse hammering beneath my ribs. Alicia stood slowly, walked forward, and placed both hands on the podium. She didn't smile. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and cool, "this case is not about a failed marriage. It is about theft. It is about a man knowingly claiming a lottery ticket he did not purchase. We are here because evidence, not emotion, not speculation, proves that the rightful purchaser of the winning ticket was Mrs. Natalie Hayes." She tapped the folder in her hand. "And we intend to show every piece of that evidence today." The first exhibit was the receipt from the convenience store showing the timestamp of the transaction. Ethan's attorney objected, arguing irrelevance, but the judge overruled him immediately. Next came the owner's sworn statement confirming he remembered me buying the ticket that night. Again, Ethan's attorney objected. Again, he was overruled. The courtroom grew quieter, a slow shift passing through the room like people collectively realizing the ground beneath Ethan was beginning to crack. Then came the moment that changed everything. Alicia approached the large screen mounted in the courtroom and said, "Your Honor, Exhibit 3 surveillance footage from the store at Willow Creek Road." The lights dimmed slightly as the video played. There I was, stepping into the store, brushing snow from my coat. I picked up the suit, placed it on the counter, handed the owner a $10 bill. He handed me the ticket. I put it into my coat pocket. The video was clear enough, undeniable enough, that whispers erupted across the courtroom. I heard someone gasp behind me. Ethan's face drained of color. Brooke shifted in her seat, her hand slipping away from his arm. Alicia let the moment settle before saying, "Your Honor, this footage alone establishes Mrs. Hayes as the purchaser. But there is more." She presented the verification from the lottery office matching my purchase timestamp with the winning numbers. She showed the photo Ethan had posted online of himself holding the creased ticket, the same creases visible in the footage of me folding it into my pocket. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "do you have any proof you purchased this ticket?" Ethan stood abruptly, his confidence unraveling. "Your Honor, she probably put it in my truck. Or maybe she bought it for us. It was a joint ticket." Alicia stepped in immediately. "Your Honor, his claim form listed him as the sole purchaser." "Not joint. Sole. That is fraud." Ethan sputtered. "I thought it was mine. I found it in the car." The judge's expression hardened. "Mr. Hayes' misunderstanding does not align with the evidence presented. The court finds overwhelming proof that Mrs. Hayes is the rightful owner of the winning ticket." Cameras clicked frantically. The air pulsed with disbelief. Then came the blow that sealed everything. Effective immediately, Judge Shaw declared all assets derived from the fraudulent claim are to be transferred to Mrs. Hayes. Furthermore, Mr. Hayes may face additional investigation regarding potential criminal fraud. Brooke shot to her feet. "This is insane," she hissed at Ethan. "You told me." "Sit down," the judge snapped without looking at her. Reporters surged toward the aisle the moment the hearing ended, shouting questions, but Alicia shielded me, guiding me toward the exit. I paused, only once turning to look at Ethan. He stood frozen, his jaw slack, his eyes hollow with the realization that the life he stole had just slipped out of his hands in front of the world. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply whispered, "Truth stands, Ethan, whether you believe in it or not." Then I walked out of the courtroom into the bright winter sunlight, feeling for the first time in months the ground steady beneath my feet. There's something I want to leave you with tonight, something bigger than the twists and turns of Natalie's story. Something that belongs to every person who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or thrown aside by someone who believed they held all the power. Because the truth is, life has a way of revealing character when everything is stripped bare. Money doesn't change people, it exposes them. Betrayal doesn't begin with the moment someone slams a door or signs their name on a lie. It begins quietly with the belief that you will never fight back, that you will never see the truth, that you will never know what was taken from you. But here's the thing: silent people are not weak people. Sometimes silence is the soil where resolve grows roots. Sometimes the softest voice becomes the one that echoes the longest. Natalie didn't win because she shouted louder or hit harder. She won because she refused to surrender her truth even when she had every reason to break. She won because she chose dignity over chaos and patience over desperation. And maybe that's the part of the story that stays with us the most. Not the courtroom, not the cameras, not even the fortune that was rightfully hers. What stays with us is the reminder that every person has a line inside them that, once crossed, wakes up a strength they didn't know they had. Maybe you've been there. Maybe someone tried to rewrite your worth. Maybe someone thought you were small enough to discard, quiet enough to ignore, or gentle enough to take advantage of. But hear me, nothing is more powerful than a person who finally sees their own value. Nothing scares a manipulator more than the moment you stop begging and start building. And nothing restores your life faster than choosing yourself without apology. Justice doesn't always come fast, but it comes for those who stand in their truth. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you choose who to let through. And healing isn't forgetting what happened. It's becoming someone who can stand on the memory without collapsing under it. So, wherever you are watching from tonight, ask yourself, what part of your story still needs your voice? What part of your life have you allowed someone else to shrink? And who would you become if you stopped waiting for permission to rise? Your dignity is yours. Your future is yours. Your quiet strength is yours. And if life has taught us anything through stories like this, it's that the people who walk away from you may take many things, but they can never take what you are willing to fight for. If you're listening from your living room, from your car, from your night shift, or from a quiet place where you're trying to rebuild, I hope you remember this. You are stronger than the moment that broke you. And one day, someone who underestimated you will watch you rise and realize they never knew you at all.